Hi Booktube, Aaron here. Hope you're doing very well. As you can see just behind me with these shelves here, they're looking a bit bare and barren and quite messy. And that's because I've just taken down all of the Faber and Faber poetry books that I own, and it looks like they probably constitute nearly half of my collection of poetry books. And I think since I started reading poetry for myself, I gravitated towards Faber and Faber, and they've become a publisher that I generally trust, particularly for contemporary poetry. I'm probably slightly more likely to give a chance to a poet I haven't really heard of if they're published by Faber and Faber. And also they've just got a great back catalogue and a great history of publishing poetry as well. And so again, there's that level of confidence there. So I've got a massive, I've got 4 piles of Faber and Faber poetry books that I've pulled off the shelves. And I think what I'll do is I'll turn the camera around, I'll get the books out on the floor, and we'll go through them and see what this collection looks like. So let's go have a look. Okay, so I think this is how we'll do it. We've got a nice giraffe cushion for our background, and we'll just jump right in. So I'll go and get the first pile of Faber books. And the first one on top here, a more contemporary poet. I think this book came out about 5 years ago. This is Kingdom Land by Rachel Allen. I liked it on the whole. Need to read it again, and I need to read more by Rachel Allen. Yeah, it came out in 2019. She's published at least one other poetry collection since Kingdom Land. Then next up, we've got Simon Armitage, the current Poet Laureate of the United Kingdom. This is his poetry collection, The Unaccompanied, which is really good. I really like this poetry collection. Just a great sort of flow to the whole thing. The Present, the second poem in there, is really, really good. And then we have his selected poems from 1989 through to 2014, which I bought at a poetry reading in 2020, and it was sort of the last event that I went to before lockdown, and I think he did sign it as well, which is nice. Then Auden, his selected poems, edited by Edward Mendelsohn, who wrote the 2-volume biography of Auden. And I've read this cover to cover and then sort of dipped in, and I constantly feel like I just need to get to know Auden better, but I'm slowly getting to know him better. I think with each rereading I'm getting a better idea of him. And then we've got Gottfried Benn, a German poet. This is translated by Michael Hoffman. A bit of a mix for me. They didn't really hit home as much as I'd like to. And Ben himself is a bit of a complicated figure. I mean, he was an army doctor or surgeon during the First and Second World War, I believe. And I'm not sure if if his affiliation with the Nazis and Nazism go any deeper than that. I haven't looked into his personal history that much. But yeah, the poems themselves didn't make a massive impression on me, but I may try him again eventually. John Berryman, 77 Dream Songs, quite a beat up edition. I recently read this with a lovely group of people, and although I haven't, he's not one of my favourite poets, but I really, really appreciated them much more with the recent read through. Yeah, just really loved them, and the perfect kind of poem to just to annotate and to sort of ask questions to, and sort of talk back to. And I think just the way that he's writing with this voice of Henry, you kind of want to bounce back off him a little bit, and sometimes just asking those questions allows you to appreciate the poem a little bit more. Then, yeah, some more contemporary poetry. This is Emily Berry, Stranger Baby. Again, like with Rachel Allen, I need to pick up some more Emily Berry. She's got quite a few collections out there. Again, this is from around, this is 2017. So this is sort of, from about 2016 through to 2020 was my sort of golden age of picking up lots of contemporary poetry and just trying as many new contemporary poets as I could. Although I'd still do that from time to time, I'm not doing it nearly as much as I was in this period. So I need to check back in with Emily Berry at some point. On to another Emily, Emily Dickinson, The Complete Poems. I love Emily Dickinson. I love this book. It's one I'm glad to have on my bookshelves, and it's one that I will always have on my bookshelves if I can help it. Lawrence Durrell, a writer that I love, just some of his poetry, edited by Peter Porter. On the whole, I quite like it. He can be quite comical in other poems, and then much more direct, much more sincere in some of his other poetry. So there's quite a range in there. So I suppose in a way, when it comes to his poetry, it's hard to say that you've met the Lawrence Durrell voice, because he's sort of jumping between so many different voices. But on the whole, it's all very accomplished, and I enjoy it. And then on to a big one, T.S. Eliot. Got The Wasteland in a nice, a nice standalone volume, which was my introduction to The Wasteland. That's what I started off with. We've got Murder in the Cathedral, one of his plays, so arguably shouldn't be in here with it being drama and not poetry, and his 4 quartets as well in a standalone, although I've just realised that there's something missing from the stack, and so I'm going to go get it, and that's because I'm reading it at the moment. It's T.S. Eliot's Complete Poems and Plays. I've taken off the dust jacket because I don't like it, and I am currently making my way through the plays. I'm up to the Confidential Clerk, but yeah, I love T.S. Eliot, and I love coming back to him and reassessing him on quite a regular basis, really. It seems like I'm reading at least one thing by him, and rereading something by him every year. So yeah, he's a touchstone for sure. And then Matthew Francis, Mandeville. This was okay. In terms of the content, it's a fun read. The poetry fell a little bit flat for me, just on a line by line level. I thought it could have been a little richer, but it's still a fun read. And then on to another touchstone poet for me, and that's W.S. Graham, a great Scottish poet. And here are his new collected poems, which, like with the Emily Dickinson and probably the collected Eliot, is one of the books that I'll, if I have to really cut down my poetry collection for whatever reason, this will be in there, because I absolutely love W.S. Graham's poetry. And then the end of this first stack, so we'll see how long this will take. Maybe I'll have to do it in parts. Philip Gross, the son of the Duke of Nowhere, a collection from the 80s, a period when they were doing sort of original artwork, which I quite like. I'm never such a fan of this design here with the FF sort of colophon just going on and on and on. I find it a bit, I don't know, just a little bit, not messy, but just there's just too much going on. But with the original artwork, to take your eye away from that, it's not too bad. Okay, on to the next stack. Starting with a classic, we've got Seamus Heaney and his new selected poems in 2 volumes. So we've got the first volume, 1966 to 87. So a lot of the early classics in there. And then the later stuff, from 88 to 2013. And I love Seamus Heaney. I need to do a good, sort of reread of everything all the way through, and maybe start picking up the individual collections and reading the whole collections instead of just the selected poems. Then on to Michael Hoffman, who we've already met in here as a translator of Gottfried Benn. Here's one of his original collections, One Lark, One Horse, which I liked. Very observational, kind of a modern equivalent to early Eliot. So yeah, I enjoy Michael Hoffman, and might try and get more of his poetry. And then onto a lot of Ted Hughes. Again, a touchstone poet, one of the poets who got me into reading poetry for myself, hence the connection with Faber and Faber. Starting off with a nice naked hardcover of his first collection, The Hawk in the Rain, which is really quite lovely. And then on to some older editions, maybe one of his strongest collections, his second collection, Lupercal, which is wonderful. I really love this collection. And then that was followed by Wadwo, which is a weird book, but I do love it. It's again one of my favourite Ted Hughes books, a weird mix of prose and poetry and drama and all sorts going on. But it has some of my favourite Ted Hughes poems in it. And then from there to Crow, which again is very powerful. Maybe Ted Hughes at his most intense. And again, some of my favourite Ted Hughes poems are in here, but I do find it hard to read all the way through. And then Gaudette, or I think it should be pronounced Gaudete, which I read earlier this year and did quite enjoy. It was a weird read, but I did enjoy reading it. Gaudete, yeah, an odd sort of narrative thing. And then some poetry for children, The Iron Wolf. This has got illustrations by, I think it's Chris Riddell in there, if it will, yeah, illustrated by Chris Riddell. And yeah, it's really quite lovely, simple nature poetry. So a nice contrast to Crow, I suppose. Then his Tales from Ovid, which was kind of like a late renaissance in his poetry career, was this collection, Tales from Ovid, where he's sort of retelling a lot of the tales from the Metamorphoses. And that it was kind of my introduction to Ovid as well. And I've since gone back and read, a more sort of traditional translation of the Metamorphoses. But this is quite good if you want to dip your toes in the water. And then his last collection, again, part of that sort of late flowering birthday letters, where he addresses Sylvia Plath and we at least get, you know, his side, and then his selected poems as well. Yeah, from 57 to 94. I haven't read this all the way through. I've sort of dipped in and out, and I use this just to get an idea of Ted Hughes's poetry between Crow and the late period, with the exception of Gaudete. But I get the impression that a lot of those middle books of poetry from the late 70s, or well, from the 70s and the 80s, are a little bit insufferable, a little boring, and maybe a little overwritten and overwrought. And so I just use this to dip in, so I don't have to read those collections all the way through. Then to a curious poet, David Jones, who was a Catholic and an artist, a great Welsh artist. And this is his In Parenthesis, which is his strange, surreal, elusive, with an A and an E, portrayal of the First World War, with just following a soldier from his going over on the boat to France. And it's strange and mythic, and as you can see, there's this kind of Arthurian gloss over the whole thing. It sort of moves between mythology and the present. Sometimes it's like this, it's these big blocks of prose, and then other times it sort of moves back into poetry. It's a really weird book, but I do love it and I find it very effective. And then the Anathemata, which I don't understand at all. I've read it, I really don't get it. I need to give it a go. It's sort of like his cantos, in a way, and yeah, just incredibly confusing. He includes his own notes, so he's got one up on Ezra Pound there, who never really felt like he needed to provide notes. Yeah, a very, very strange book. I think I might revisit this before trying anything else by Jones. And then again, something a little more recent, Deaf Republic by Ilya Kaminsky. Again, a contemporary poet that I need to check in with, and I know he's released at least one more collection since this, so I need to read a little more by him, because this is a very effective book. Okay, past the halfway point now, and again, another classic poet here. We have the collected poems of Philip Larkin, a poet I've tried to like. There are poems by him that I like, but on the whole, I find him a bit annoying as a poet, if I'm honest. But there are some lovely poems that I enjoy by him. Marianne Moore, the quote-unquote complete poems. This is the edition of the complete poems I think she prepared herself, and she culled many of the very early poems, and so it's not really a complete reflection of her work. There's a more recent complete poems that does contain everything, and I don't really like this edition. It's shiny. I don't like the way it looks. So there's a lot about it that I don't like, and I need to revisit more at some point. Then we've got Saltwater by Andrew Motion, who was the poet laureate about 25 years ago. There we go, appointed poet laureate in 1999, and was poet, so it would have been poet laureate until 2009, and then Carol Ann Duffy took over. And I've dipped into this and enjoyed bits of it, but I still don't really get Andrew Motion. I kind of put him in that Larkin camp, really, where there are some good moments, but I don't feel like I enjoy him on the whole. Another great Scottish poet, Edwin Muir, selected poems edited by T.S. Eliot, and he's wonderful. Maybe more famous for, along with his wife, is it Miller? No, Willa Muir. They both translated Kafka and were, I think, maybe the earliest English translators of Kafka, or translators of Kafka into English, I should say. But his poetry is very good. I really like his poetry. And then on to Paul Muldoon, another one of my sort of touchstone poets, a poet I really, really love. This is Madoc, a really odd book. Kind of imagining if Southey and Coleridge had gone over to America to found their pantisocracy, and yeah, weirdness ensues. It's an experience, and it's a lot of fun, but yeah, quite crazy. Then the Annals of Chile, which might be one of my favourite Paul Muldoon collections. I quite like the Annals of Chile. Quite an odd, baffling cover there, but again, a reflection of the poetry itself. Hay, also by Paul Muldoon. Again, I quite like this collection. I like it quite a lot. And then some more recent stuff by him. 1000 Things Worth Knowing. Again, very, very good. I enjoyed this a lot. And the same for Frolic and Detour, one of his most recent collections. You just know what you're going to get with Paul Muldoon, and it's going to be baffling, but it's going to be fun. And there is going to be an emotional resonance underneath it. It's not just fun and games. There is a weight to the poetry. And with this one, there's a kind of rage simmering under everything, which I'm not used to as much in Paul Muldoon, at just the modern world and how rubbish everything seems to be. Yeah, that seems to be what's animating many of these poems, which I wasn't as used to, and was, surprising and interesting to see. Another one of my all-time favourite poets now. This is Alice Oswald. We have The Thing in the Gapstone Style, her first collection. Very, very good. Dart, maybe the collection that made her name. It's just one long poem following the River Dart in Devon from its source to the sea, and meeting, or sort of, she appropriates the voices of many of the people who live on its banks and make a livelihood, and it's wonderful, a really wonderful poem. And then Woods, etc., which was my introduction to Alice Oswald. And then Memorial, which is an excavation of the Iliad, taking mainly the deaths of the combatants, and using and extending the metaphors of their deaths, or the similes, I should say, the grand epic similes that Homer uses. She embellishes them and maybe reinvents them, and it's really, really wonderful. I love this book. I find it much more effective than Nobody, when she did a similar thing with the Odyssey. I think this is slightly more successful. And then I think after this book, she moved over to a different publisher. So I do have more by her, but put out by Jonathan Cape. And then on to Don Patterson. This is Orpheus, a version of Rilke, of Rilke's sonnets to Orpheus. This was the first sort of Rilke adjacent thing that I read. It is basically a loose translation of the sonnets to Orpheus, so it's an introduction to Rilke of sorts, but yeah, it was also an introduction to Don Patterson for me as well. This was the first thing that I ever read by him. And then his collection Rain, which is wonderful. I think this is my favourite Don Patterson collection. And a slightly more recent collection, The Arctic, which is very good as well. On to Sylvia Plath, yet another touchstone poet, as I was saying, with birthday letters about, Ted Hughes finally addressing Sylvia Plath and giving his side of the story. I felt reading birthday letters for the first time that that it would be unfair to read them and be unfamiliar with Sylvia Plath. And so I picked up some of her poetry and have been just, loving her, pretty much everything I've read by her ever since. So as I said, another touchstone. So here's Ariel. I think really if you're going to read one thing by Sylvia Plath, it kind of has to be Ariel. Just a wonderful collection. And then we've got Crossing the Water, which is a collection of poems she wrote between, if I'm remembering correctly, she wrote them between The Colossus, which was her first collection of poems, and Ariel. So these are poems that didn't make it into Ariel, but were kind of written just before those poems. And there's some really good poems in here. And then I've got the collected poems as well. It's edited by Ted Hughes. There are things that are missing because Ted Hughes didn't think to include them, or, was being, to put it generously, a bit nefarious. But yeah, again, something that I'll be always keeping on my shelves if possible. And then on to the last stack. We're very nearly there now. And the last stack is the shortest because it's got a lot of chunksters on it. Starting off with the Cantos by Ezra Pound. I'm currently making my way through them. And it's a surprisingly rewarding experience if you go slowly and if you're willing to look things up and reread and, just spend time in them. I think you can have fun with them, just reading them, trying to read the whole thing cover to cover as a reading experience. But it's a fun book to live with if you give it the time. Next up, some more Pound. This is just a general selection of his poems and translations. And it was good. It was very serviceable to get a good general idea of his career. Then we've got Maurice Riordan, Shoulder Tap, which I enjoyed. It's a good collection. I'd like to read some more by Maurice Riordan. Vikram Seth, The Golden Gate, a novel in verse, which I need to get to. I might try and read this before I read A Suitable Boy, I think. I've been meaning to get to this for a while. And then Wallace Stevens, Selected Poems. I've read this through a couple of times, and I feel like I need to get a broader sort of collected poems or something from Wallace Stevens, and just spend a bit more time with him and get a better idea of his career as a whole. There are poems by Stevens that I absolutely love, but he still confounds and baffles me. There'll be quite a lot more rereading to come, I think. And then Derek Walcott, his Selected Poems is edited by Edward Bohr. I don't know Walcott as much as I'd like. I've dipped into this, but really should spend some more time with him. But yeah, this is all I have by him at the moment. And then I need to get more Yeats, but this is just a good selection of W.B. Yeats, selected by Seamus Heaney. And I love it. It's one of my go-to books if I don't know what to read. And again, it would be one that's still on my shelves if I have to cull them. You know, it's would be on my top 10 books of poetry. And then finally, back to T.S. Eliot, and this is a big facsimile and transcript of the original drafts of The Wasteland. And it's you know, it's just an interesting thing to look at and to flip through to get an idea of how the poem was shaped. And Ezra Pound did do a lot, and people love to sort of tell the story of how the writing of The Wasteland was Eliot's, but the architecture of the poem was Pound's. Looking at this, I don't think that's quite the case. Pound, although he's very present in parts, when it comes to the I just had to pause to cough. Yeah, although he's very present in parts, Pound isn't quite as heavy-handed and as present as I thought he'd be in the annotations and in the rewriting and everything. He's there, and he did a great job in encouraging Eliot to cut certain bits out and to reorder things. But I think sometimes he's sort of over-credited for what he brings to the poem. But anyway, we'll leave it there. That is a nice tour through all of my Faber and Faber poetry books. I feel like I've tried to do tours of my poetry shelves before, and they always get a bit tedious because there's just so much there and it's hard to talk about every poet. And so I hope just by splitting it up and just looking at this one publisher, it's given you a good idea of what's on these books directly behind my head in my videos. So let me know what you thought, if you've read any of these poets, if you have other collections by some of these poets, if you know, any poets that are like these that maybe you haven't seen mentioned, feel free to recommend them. But yeah, just let me know what you think. But for now, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye bye.